Hello and welcome to Underlords Universe. And today we are discussing a literary element of our world, Weird Tales Talk. And this is, I think, just our second episode of Weird Tales Talk. What we do here at Underlords Universe is discuss a lot of the stuff that inspires us to be creative in our own right. Because what else are you going to do with your time? My colleague over here, Prescott Lemon, is an author of the Underlords of the Overworld series and the OAO series, which will be linked below.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a brand new selection of short stories called Smaller Than Death out. We're currently working on some new music as well. If you'd like to support our channel, and please do, you can, do the whole like, subscribe thing. And yeah, we are, I'm developing a growing interest in short stories, weird tales and stuff, partly influenced by you, but also like this volume here, edited by Marvin Kaye. This was something I remember seeing at the local library back in the early 80s, and I just found a new copy of it. But we're going to be
Nice.
pulling, I'm sorry?
I just said nice
Yeah, nice.
stuff. Yeah.
We're going to be pulling from volumes such as this. Marvin Kaye also edited this volume of Weird Tales. Yes, there's that Best of Weird Tales there. And oh gosh, we've got this nice 4-volume paperback Weird Tales set, which was edited by Lynn Carter, who had also done quite a lot of the old Conan editing. Man, we've got old volumes like this. We got stuff to keep us busy for a long time.
There's a
We're
lot of
also,
meat on that bone, my friend.
you
A
betcha,
lot of
you
meat on
betcha.
that
We're
bone.
and
Weird
Stephen,
meat.
pure meat. Stephen King was also highly influenced by all these weird tales, and he has some weird tales of his own. So we got lots to read, and frankly, the thing I like about these stories is that they're just consumable. I know some people, want to get deep into a 1,000-page novel, but just the other day I read A Masked Ball by Seabury Quinn.
Seabury Quinn.
I think it's 19 pages, you know. Um, and another great thing about some of these stories is that if there's one we mentioned, like, oh, I'd like to read that, you might be able to find it out there online somewhere. You may not have to pick up a whole volume like that. So
Yeah, this stuff is out there. And, Weird Tales, as we've talked about, was published primarily, I think the golden heyday of it was 1923 to maybe 1945, around there, so maybe a little later than that.
yeah.
But this Weird Tales has had several incarnations, kind of dying and being revived multiple times. And these stories are hugely influential and I think overlooked in their depth and the influence they have on modern fantasy and modern horror as well. So it's fun to talk about these, and I'm excited today to be talking about Seabury Quinn. And you turned me out of the story. I've been really digesting and kind of getting into his very famous Jules de Grandin stories, which were intensely popular and kind of occult mysteries featuring this occult detective Jules de Grandin. But the story we're going to talk about today, The Masked Ball, published in I think May of 1947 in Weird Tales, is not a Jules de Grandin story. So
Right. So
yeah,
it's not featuring that character. The
correct.
character here is Holloway, but um to that point though, isn't Seabury Quinn, my notes say he's the most prolific weird tales author. Like there's more
He
Seabury Quinn stories in any of those volumes than, or excuse me, not necessarily in these collected works, but in the original Weird Tales magazine.
Yeah, he was highly published and extremely popular. His work was, I think he was considered the most successful of that golden age of Weird Tales writers. And, I think the reason for that is so much of his writing, the reason I'm a big fan is that it's just really fun and it's very seamless and fluid. It doesn't quite have maybe the depth of imagination of like an H.P. Lovecraft, who probably has, in my opinion, maybe the deepest reservoir of imagination. But that stuff can get a little heady and
Well,
tedious. Whereas, Seabury Quinn, it's just kind of like action. Go.
and to draw a contrast there, you Lovecraft, it has great ideas, but sometimes his stuff is a real chore to read. Like he's
It
not.
can be.
We'll
It sure
we'll
can be.
we'll do some Lovecraft later, but I have found him lacking in dialogue and being a little verbose in exposition. Let's just say.
Yeah, whereas the Quinn stories, whereas the Seabury Quinn stories, I mean, they read in such a modern, fluid way, and they're just a lot of fun. So I highly recommend the Jules de Grandin stories, and I really enjoyed the Masked Ball. So shall we
Yeah, there.
dig in?
But one more thing about his background, I thought this was interesting. He's a World War I veteran, but
Yes.
he was a lawyer that specialized in mortuary jurisprudence.
Yeah.
And it's like of his non-fictional work, he actually has a couple works out about embalming and the law,
Yeah.
and a guide for like funeral directors or something like that he was involved in. And um, it's just interesting. And I think he was born in Washington, D.C., 1889. He passed away in 1969. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, this masked ball, let's dig in as you suggest. And the main character's character called Holloway,
Horace Holloway. I
Horace
love that
Holloway.
name. Horace Holloway is our main character. He's our protagonist.
Yeah. Which, by the way, just as a side note, remind me when we're done here. That just gave me an idea, and I want to share an idea with you. So
Okay.
anyway, that's
So
by the
what
way,
are your initial
that's
thoughts about the Masked
that's
Ball?
that's how these things work. By the way, we hear something, we see something, and it triggers an idea, and then we say something to the other guy, and then the next thing you know, there's some creative thing going on. So yeah, my initial thought, first of all, at the outset of the story, I don't remember how far in, but very early on, I thought to myself, I have an idea how this ends. And I was partially correct in the way that it ended. And I was partially not correct. And that wasn't so much of a spoil for me or anything. It was just kind of like, oh, let's just see where this goes. And in a
Yeah.
19-page story, it's not like it's a colossal waste of time if you turn out to be correct in your assumption of where it's going to go. I just find that to be kind of a fun little exploration. But the whole time that I was reading it, I was very influenced in my mind as I was reading it by some of the scenes from the film Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh
And
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can with the masks and
yeah, sure.
the costume party and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
also because in the back of my mind I could hear Jocelyn Pook's music, The Masked Ball, which Ghost used for their their intro music for so many years. So I took to the story because I had some other um, conceptual ideas that were kind of feeding my context for it and my image in my mind for it. And I've been to New Orleans a couple times, so I could kind of envision being, in places like Bourbon Street and the old architecture down there and everything. So I liked it for that. I thought that it was a good read, but that also speaks to a bit of a bias going in. It's like I think an inclination rather than a bias. I'm sorry. I think maybe an inclination to kind of like it just because of those other influences. Um,
I think a lot of our taste works that way. I mean, we're
mhm.
drawn to things, and I think that what Quinn does really well, not just in this story but in other stories, is he's really evocative and in creating imagery. Um, in his stories and just he's really good at moving a story along with pacing and action. These are a lot of his stories. I mean, there's a lot of action as opposed to just description, and the dialogue's always fun. So that's definitely something that pulls me into his work as well.
So can I ask you this question? Because I saw this story as a bit of a chase story. Um, because
Okay.
I don't want to give anything away to anybody who wants to look the story up and read it for themselves, but Horace Holloway has an encounter with somebody who catches his attention, we'll say, and he follows her through
Yes.
to you know to where the story ends up, and it was interesting because as I read it, I thought to myself, I wonder if the story is kind of a metaphor for what we all chase in life, whether we want to or not, whether we realize it or not, we are kind of chasing after the end, the death, that
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So now what form that takes in terms of the story, I'm not going to give away, but that's kind of how I read it. And I just kind of wanted what was your framework as you read it, your
That's
perspective?
an interesting take. You use the word a chase,
Hmm.
and I think that's a really very perceptive. And as I was reading it, and again, I don't want to give away any spoilers because again, I would encourage people to read this story because it's a lot of fun. Um, it's a unique take on the ghost story. So I won't say anything more on that, but it kind of flips that kind of convention. It flips the convention with ghost story a little bit, which I loved. But I see the story as a quest. So I'm going to take that word
Mm.
chase
Okay.
and I'm gonna pivot that a little bit. I saw this as a quest because Horace Holloway, he's a war veteran from the Pacific. He's in New York. He's returned to New York after the war, and he's not really fitting in. He's having trouble reacclimating to his life. Like
Hmm.
he mentions, like friends have moved on. His old job is kind of like, well, do you want to work here or what? He's like, he's restless. That's the word I think that is used in the story. Is he's restless. He doesn't want to fit back into his previous life before the war. So what does he do? He jumps on a train and he goes to New Orleans. And I think there's an interesting dichotomy between New York and New Orleans, both old cities. But I think that New Orleans really represents New York represents modernity for him, whereas New Orleans is kind of antiquity.
Mm.
So he's already leaving his world and going to another world. And he has this guide. The story actually begins with where he's being guided on this quest. He doesn't even really know he's on this quest to kind of figure out why he can't readjust to his life. And his guide is this costumer. He's like, yeah, I'll dress up in a costume because that's what you do during Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And he gets this costume that's actually an artifact of the past. It's kind of it's this buckskin
Yeah.
outfit with
Which
with an authentic rifle. So there's a real authenticity to his moving back in time.
and that actually surprised me. I was like, why that? But
Yeah.
that's okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I was a little taken aback, like what the heck? I mean, and then he gives him like this authentic rifle.
Yeah.
And of course, I can't remember if it was Dostoevsky or which Russian writer said, that kind of axiom of, if you're going to hang a rifle over the door or over the fireplace in Act One, you better use it by Act Three. And I hadn't even psychologically picked up on that
Mm.
was going to happen. So that was a fun twist for the story. But like you said, he actually is almost like moving back in time, and he encounters this woman coming out of a graveyard,
Yeah.
leaving this graveyard, and they become very quickly connected and end up at this masked ball where things devolve and get out of hand. There's an altercation that leads to a conflict that ultimately brings the story to resolution. But to me, and again, I don't want to give away too many details because I encourage people to read this story. It's a great story, I think. But this is all about him not acclimating back into his life, having to step out into another world, experience this other world, and that ultimately changes him and brings him back to his former life, although he is changed at that point by the events that transpired in the story. So, really fun story, and a lot gets packed in there. I think you said 19 pages. A
Yeah.
lot gets packed in 19 pages. There's romance, there's action, intrigue. It's a great flow.
Yeah. I also thought I want to get your take on this as well. The end I would say it has a bit of an intended twist ending. If you don't really see it coming, or if you,
Right.
in my part, I kind of saw part, like I saw it coming kind of partially. Uh, One of this, here's a thought that came to my mind. When M. Night Shyamalan really kind of came out on the scene with The Sixth Sense, the Sixth Sense is one of those films where, I mean, yeah, you could watch it multiple times and enjoy it, but the first time you see it, if you don't see the end coming, it really works. You can't
Yeah.
really see it a second time because the whole thing is about driving towards that twist ending. Uh,
Yeah.
and then not too long after, I'd have to look up the dates on this, but Nicole Kidman was in the movie The Others. The Others had a big twist ending, kind of like that. And it seemed like with The Sixth Sense and The Others, and movies like that, it was like a discovery of this way of storytelling that really focused on this twist ending. But when I was reading the Masked Ball by Seabury Quinn, it was like, oh, this has been done before. I mean, it was almost as if people like M. Night Shyamalan were hearkening back to that type of storytelling. And I don't know, I'm not as well versed in the history of literature to be able to speak to that, but I don't just, your thoughts on that idea.
Well, it's funny you mentioned The Sixth Sense because I think I actually thought about it. I haven't seen the others, or if I have, I don't remember it. But
Mhm.
I did think about The Sixth Sense through as I was reading this because it's like wow, and you can definitely see that I think there quite possibly could have been some influence. Again, don't want to give away anything, but I think that he achieves this twist pretty successfully because clearly you have this tension building in the story and you know something's going on.
Hmm.
And I hadn't quite seen what was about to transpire. And he even foreshadows it a little bit with a joke the kid that Horace Holloway makes about coffee and sunrise, which again I'll leave that to the viewer to go and explore that.
Hmm.
But I do think that was definitely this was definitely this I suspect this was really influential for some of those modern ghost stories that we're seeing out there. So I love that.
Which now, if that's the case, and I have no evidence that,
No evidence.
that those are connected, but it does kind of go to show that there's at least the possibility that some of these pulp writers might have had a little bit more credibility, and maybe not credibility, because that depends on who's bestowing the credibility upon them, I suppose, but maybe a little bit more depth or talent, creativity than their contemporaries might have recognized.
Yeah, no, I'm a firm believer in that. I think that, and I've said this before, but I think pulps get overlooked as kind of
Mhm.
trashy, and to a certain degree that's true. But I also think that there's more there than people sometimes recognize from a storytelling perspective, from a character perspective. So, and I
Mhm.
think they were hugely influential. I think they were hugely influential, and you know, so I definitely think that that's the case, and I think that that's why I think that this series that we're doing, this Weird Tales Talk,
Mhm.
is fun because I'm going back and I'm reading stories I've never read or rereading stories I've read and kind of looking at them differently for what's the impact or influence this had and how good of a story this is. And certainly some are better than others. But
So, yeah. Okay. I got a thought, but it looked like I interrupted you. So,
no, go ahead, please
okay.
with the thought.
So, you've been writing, how long have you been writing yourself actively?
Oh, probably about 15 years now.
Okay. And it took you about how long before you felt comfortable actually putting something out there that somebody could access to publish?
Really close to 10 years before I was comfortable.
Hmm.
There was a lot of crap, and there's still a lot of crap in
Well,
what I write.
but
Um,
at the same, okay. So, as somebody who has kind of gotten into the craft of writing for over a decade, uh, do you read these stories differently now that you've had more of a perspective on writing? Because I know I tend to listen to music, for example, a little differently
Yeah, I've thought about
as a
that
guitar
parallel
player. So yeah.
because I would say you are much more musically inclined than me, and I think I have a tendency to go deeper with some of the story stuff where and we overlap.
Hmm.
We complement each other in those different areas. Um, and I certainly think that I think it's impossible to not study the craft of some artistic form and not look deeper at it. And I'm not a critic, and
Hmm.
I'm not I don't consider myself any kind of literary expert, but I do feel that I look at story construction, dialogue, pacing, and just overall uniqueness of a story very differently than I used to. And along the way, I'd always wanted to write, but I discovered that getting into adulthood up to the point where I started writing, I wasn't reading much. And, even after I started writing, I didn't read much because I really enjoyed the writing process. But I think what really helped me as a writer was to start reading and start reading a lot of different authors and a lot of different writers across different genres. And I kind of stick in that speculative fiction
Hmm.
wheelhouse. But, I think that that's really one of the things that helps a lot. So yeah, I think that that's kind of I just kind of rambled through a simple
No,
answer.
that's
Yes.
yeah, but I think that's I mean that's why I asked the questions to see what how how you would respond to that. But is this a good moment to just kind of plug a quick plug on your stuff here?
Sure. Yeah, I got a couple of them here.
Do
So
you have
yeah,
do you have
so
a or a physical copy of the new um smaller than
Smaller Than Death.
yeah.
I don't have a physical copy yet. It's
Okay.
on the way, so I'm excited to see that. But it is available in physical format on Amazon now, and
Yeah.
will be available as an ebook shortly.
So
But
you want to just do it?
I think that one of the things of the Underlords of the Overworld that we've really tried to do is blend this music and fiction into kind of this semi-cohesive universe of
That's a good way to
weird
put it.
tales and weird music. And so the stories are really intended to do that. They're intended to be, and again, this is again why I love Seabury Quinn so much, because the stories move with a certain pacing and action, and they're fun, and they're not overly tedious. And I think that that's really what I kind of aspire to,
Hmm.
is to write a fun story, not necessarily. I don't consider, like I said, I don't consider myself a literary, having any real literary depth of any sort. It's more just fun,
Hmm.
and I think that that's the purpose. So, Underlords of the Overworld is a series that follows a rock band that has accidentally sold their souls to a lesser demon, and all of the hijinks that follow with their quest for fame and fortune. And that loosely parallels our own musical journey, as we've talked about before. So, that's a really fun. That's been a really fun journey with
Yeah.
that
And
story.
and I'd like to make a quick note about that. That was inspired really kind of by like kind of a parallel universe imagining of the context and background of our own musical
Yeah,
development, which is kind of this is the original album. And then we did an album of character songs because in those stories that you make a lot of references to not only real bands, but also fictional bands that you created. And so we have this songs from the Underlords Universe album titled Hell Comes in Small Packages. And it's actually like supposed to be a compilation of songs by uh, artists and bands that are in the Underlords stories, which I think
yeah,
is
and
fun.
and I think I'm gonna plug that record a little bit more, because I think that as I was talking about earlier, you really do a great job, with kind of the musical depth of taking what's in the stories and pulling from it and creating music. And I think that that's kind of a reciprocal process as we work towards music and stories. So that's been a lot of fun, and seeing the universe expand into other, musical ventures, into other lines of stories. OAO is a line of stories about a misfit group of occult misfits who form a secret society and subcontract government, to solve esoteric mysteries, and again, you can hear that relates so circling back to what we were talking about with Seabury Quinn and the Jules de Grandin stories. And that was unintentional. I hadn't, read any of those stories. But it's interesting to look at some of the things we've created and how musically and from a fiction perspective, it's like this really ties back to some of the stuff that we really love. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
I
been a
like
really
to.
fun process.
Yeah, and I like to think of these stories, you can read them independently of each other, but if you read all of them, you'll start to see an overlap within the universe. If you listen to the music, we started off as instrumental, so it can serve as just great background music for a party or for a D&D campaign.
A
Uh,
weird party.
but the song titles and certainly the album of various artists, fictional artists, has vocals and what is supposed to be a humorous record. But not everything we do is in that vein. We're currently working on two albums right now. A decent amount of instrumental stuff, but also a decent amount of stuff with vocals as well, with our great vocalist Andy. So yeah. Anyway, that's all this stuff kind of serves to help create a inspiration for us to create our own stuff. Because when we were kids, it's all we really kind of wanted to do.
Indeed.
I mean, going to college and getting a degree, that's fine. Having my job, I'm glad it's not a job that I hate. It's,
Pays the bills.
I like my job, it's fine. But yeah, it pays the bills and enables us to sit around and talk about things that we like and then try to create stuff that we like. So on that note, I don't know, do you have any other final thoughts about Masked Ball, Seabury Quinn? We're going to try to do these without giving anything away, like
Yeah.
certain, you know?
No, I've really enjoyed this. I would encourage, if you're watching this, I encourage you to read Seabury Quinn, read Massball, read
Mhm.
the Jules de Grandin stories. They're just really really a blast and
And
just a
and
fun read.
read some H. Prescott Lemon.
Yeah, if you get around to it,
Yeah.
if you get around to it, that'd be great. Stuff's available on Amazon.
Mhm.
And yeah, with that, I think it's time to sign off and maybe go do a little more reading or listening to music.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. So again, if you've been with us this whole time, please like, subscribe, give us a comment if you've read any of these Weird Tales. We got a lot of volumes here, so if you're a Weird Tales fan and you have some recommendations, throw one in there. And
Please.
maybe we'll see you next time.
I hope
Ciao.
so. Bye.